Dr. Kim, Ji-ho stared at his phone in disbelief. The NASA number flashed on the screen again. His hand shook as he answered the call. "Hello, Dr. Kim speaking," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The voice on the other end belonged to NASA's Director of Engineering. "Dr. Kim, we've been watching your work on plasma propulsion systems. We need you for the Artemis program." Ji-ho sat down in his small office at the Korean Space Research Institute. The walls were covered with rocket designs and equations. 10 years of work, and now NASA wanted him. The next morning, Ji-ho walked into his boss's office. Director Kang looked up from his computer with tired eyes. "You're here early, Ji-ho." "NASA called yesterday," Ji-ho said. "They want me for the Artemis program." Director Kang's eyes widened. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the morning sun lit up the test rockets on the launch pad. "This is a big opportunity, Ji-ho. But we need you here too. Our own lunar program is just starting." Ji-ho joined him at the window. "I know. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. Tell me what you're thinking," Director Kang said. Ji-ho pointed to the rockets outside. "My plasma engine design works. It could cut the trip to the moon by almost a third. But here, we're still years away from testing it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "At NASA, I could help get humans back to the moon next year." Director Kang nodded slowly. "And put Korean technology on the world stage." "Exactly," Ji-ho said. "I wouldn't be abandoning our program. I'd be opening doors for it." Later that day, Ji-ho sat at his desk, looking at family photos. His father had worked on Korea's first satellites. "Space belongs to everyone," his father used to say. "But only if we work together to reach it." The decision weighed heavily on Ji-ho. Korea's space program was growing fast. They had plans for their own moon mission. Leaving now felt like walking away from a dream they'd all shared. His computer beeped with a new email. NASA had sent the official offer. The position: lead propulsion engineer for the Artemis program. They wanted his answer within 48 hours. Ji-ho walked through the research center's halls one last time that evening. In the engine test chamber, his plasma propulsion prototype sat ready for its next test. The blue-white glow of the plasma reminded him of moonlight. He thought about the moon landing videos he watched as a child. Now he had a chance to help write the next chapter of that story, not just for Korea, but for everyone. That night, Ji-ho wrote 2 emails. The first was to NASA, accepting their offer. The second was to Director Kang, with a detailed plan for sharing his research between NASA and the Korean Space Research Institute. "The moon doesn't belong to one nation," he wrote, "and neither does the path to reach it." 3 weeks later, Ji-ho stood at the entrance to NASA's Kennedy Space Center. The morning sun lit up the massive vehicle assembly building, where the Artemis rocket would come together. His plasma engine designs were safely stored in his laptop, ready to help humanity return to the moon. A woman in a NASA uniform walked up to him. "Dr. Kim, I'm Dr. Lee Sun-mai, head of geological studies. Welcome to Artemis." She smiled. "We've got a lot of work to do." Ji-ho looked at the busy space center around him. Engineers rushed between buildings. In the distance, launch pads waited for the rockets that would carry humans back to the moon. He thought of his father's words about space belonging to everyone. "Yes," he said, picking up his bags. "We do." Dr. Lee Sun-mai's office looked like a rock collection had exploded. Lunar samples from the Apollo missions sat next to computer models of moon rocks. Ji-ho carefully moved a stack of papers to sit down. "Your plasma engine design is brilliant," Sun-mai said, pulling up Ji-ho's work on her computer. "But we need to make it work with NASA's systems in 3 months." Ji-ho frowned at the timeline. 3 months? That's not possible. "Welcome to Artemis," Sun-mai smiled. She had been at NASA for 5 years and knew how to get things done. "Let me show you something." They walked to the engineering lab. Teams of scientists worked on different parts of the Artemis mission. Sun-mai led Ji-ho to a large screen showing the moon's surface. See these dark areas? She pointed to spots on the screen. They have the strongest magnetic fields. Your engine needs to work perfectly there, or we can't land. Jai-Ho studied the map. His engine wasn't designed for such strong magnetic fields. He would need to make big changes. Back in his new office, Jai-Ho called Korea. His old team agreed to help test the engine changes. Working across time zones meant they could run tests 24 hours a day. 2 weeks passed quickly. Jai-Ho barely slept, moving between video calls with Korea and meetings at NASA. Sunmi often brought him coffee and helped explain NASA's ways of doing things. One evening, as they worked late, Sunmi asked, "Why did you really come to NASA, Jai-Ho?" Jai-Ho looked up from his computer. "My father always said space belongs to everyone. But each country works separately." He pointed to his engine design. "Maybe this can help change that." Sunmi nodded. "That's why I came too. Science works better when we share it." The next day, they hit a problem. The engine tests in Korea showed dangerous power spikes near strong magnetic fields. Jai-Ho's hands shook as he read the reports. This could delay the whole mission. "We need help," Sunmi said. She made some calls. Soon, Jai-Ho's office was full of engineers from different NASA teams. They ordered pizza and worked through the night. Each person brought different ideas. Some had worked on Mars missions, others on satellite problems. "Look at this," said one engineer, pointing to Jai-Ho's design. "What if we add magnetic shielding here and reshape the plasma flow like this?" Another added. Jai-Ho watched in amazement. In Korea, he would have solved this alone. Here, everyone worked together, sharing ideas freely. By morning, they had a solution. Jai-Ho sent the new design to Korea for testing. While they waited, Sunmi showed him around Kennedy Space Center. "See that building?" She pointed to a massive structure. "That's where we'll put your engine in the rocket. In 2 months, it will help take humans back to the moon." The next day, Korea reported success. The engine worked perfectly, even with strong magnetic fields. Jai-Ho's team sent congratulations, proud that Korean technology would help return humans to the moon. That evening, Jai-Ho and Sunmi stood watching the sunset at Launch Pad 39B, where the Artemis rocket would take off. "We're really going to do this," Jai-Ho said quietly. Sunmi nodded. "Yes, we are. Not as Korean or American scientists, but as humans." Jai-Ho thought about all the people working together, his team in Korea, the NASA engineers, scientists from around the world. His father was right. Space belonged to everyone, and now they were reaching for it together. The computer screens in NASA's geology lab showed something unexpected. Dr. Lee Sunmi checked the numbers again, then called Dr. Kim Jai-Ho immediately. "Jai-Ho, come to the lab right now," she said. Her voice was excited. "Your engine tests showed us something amazing." Jai-Ho walked quickly through NASA's long hallways. When he entered the lab, Sunmi pointed to her screens. They showed data from his latest engine test, but something was different. "Look at these readings," Sunmi said. "Your plasma engine detected unusual energy patterns in the moon samples we tested it with." Jai-Ho looked closer. The numbers didn't make sense at first. Then his eyes widened. "Is that what I think it is?" Sunmi nodded. "Helium-3. Much more than we thought existed in moon rocks. And your engine found it." Helium-3 was rare on Earth, but could power fusion reactors. Scientists had always known the moon had some, but not this much. This discovery could change everything. They worked through the night, checking their findings. Jai-Ho's plasma engine had accidentally created the perfect conditions to detect helium-3. The magnetic fields they thought were a problem had actually helped them find it. The next morning, they presented their discovery to NASA's directors. The room was full of important people in suits, all listening carefully. "The moon has enough helium-3 to power Earth for centuries," Sunmi explained. She showed maps of where they thought the most helium-3 would be. "And Dr. Kim's engine can help us find and collect it." The NASA directors looked at each other. One of them stood up. This changes the mission completely. We're not just going back to the moon now. We're going to change humanity's future. Over the next few days, news of their discovery spread through NASA. Engineers started designing new tools to collect helium-3. The mission now had two goals: return humans to the moon and start planning for energy collection. Jai-ho called Korea to share the news. His old team was excited. They immediately offered to help design collection equipment. Soon, teams from other space agencies also called, wanting to help. One evening, Jai-ho found Sunmai still working in her lab. She was looking at old Apollo mission photos, marking places where helium-3 might be strongest. "Did you ever think we'd find something this big?" he asked. Sunmai smiled. "I always hoped we would. That's why I study moon rocks. They still have so many secrets to tell us." They spent the next week updating their presentation for the public announcement. The world needed to know what they had found, but in a way everyone could understand. On the day of the announcement, reporters filled NASA's press room. Cameras flashed as Jai-ho and Sunmai explained their discovery. They used simple words to tell people how helium-3 from the moon could help solve Earth's energy problems. After the presentation, Jai-ho's phone filled with messages from Korea. His father sent a simple text: "Now everyone will work together, just like you wanted." That night, Jai-ho and Sunmai stood outside, looking at the moon. It seemed different now, knowing what they had found. "We're not just going back to leave footprints this time," Sunmai said. Jai-ho nodded. "No, we're going back to help everyone on Earth. And we're doing it together." The moon shone brightly above them, no longer just a destination to reach, but a key to humanity's future. Their accidental discovery had turned a simple return mission into something much bigger. A chance to change life on Earth forever. The warning lights in the life support testing chamber turned red. Engineers rushed around, checking screens and pressing buttons. Nothing worked. The oxygen levels kept dropping. Dr. Kim Ji-ho watched through the glass window. The test chamber was supposed to copy the conditions inside the spacecraft that would take astronauts to the moon. If they couldn't fix this problem, the whole mission would stop. "We need help," Sunmai said, standing next to him. "I know someone." An hour later, Park Min-seo arrived from NASA's Environmental Systems Division. She was young, but had already solved complex problems on other space missions. Min-seo walked straight to the testing chamber's control panel. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out her tablet. Jai-ho and Sunmai explained the problem. The oxygen recycling system worked fine at first, but after 48 hours, it started failing. No one knew why. Min-seo typed quickly on her tablet. "When did you last change the air filters?" "Yesterday," Jai-ho answered. Min-seo shook her head. "That's the problem. Show me the filters." They walked to the maintenance room. Min-seo opened one of the used filters and studied it carefully. Under a microscope, she found tiny crystals growing inside. "The plasma from your engine," she said to Jai-ho. "It changes how the filters work." The crystals blocked the airflow after 2 days. Jai-ho felt his heart sink. His engine design was causing the problem. They would have to start over. But Min-seo wasn't finished. "We don't need new filters," she said. "We need to change how we use them." She spent the next hour drawing diagrams and explaining her idea. Instead of changing filters every 3 days, they would rotate between 3 sets of filters. Each set would get cleaned while the others worked. "The crystals dissolve in salt water," Min-seo explained. "We can clean and reuse the same filters over and over." They tested her solution immediately. Ji-ho watched the oxygen levels on the screen. This time, they stayed steady. After 3 days, everything still worked perfectly. The NASA directors were happy. Min-seo's simple fix had saved them weeks of delay. They asked her to join the main engineering team. That evening, Jai-ho found Min-seo in the cafeteria. She was eating alone, working on her tablet. "Thank you," he said, sitting down. You saved my engine design. Min Seo looked up. Your engine is amazing. It just needed a friend. She showed him her tablet. Look, I have more ideas for the life support systems. Soon, Sun Li joined them. The three engineers talked for hours about the mission. Each person saw different parts of the puzzle. Together, they could solve any problem. The next day, they gave their report to the mission control team. Min Seo explained how the new filter system would work in space. The astronauts would need minimal training to use it. Sometimes the best solutions are simple, she said. We just have to look at problems differently. After the meeting, Jai-ho looked at the giant countdown clock in the main hall. 30 days until launch. His engine was ready. Thanks to Min Seo, the life support systems were better than ever. The moon seemed closer now. Soon, humans would return, not just to visit, but to find new energy sources that could help everyone on Earth. And it would happen because people from different countries worked together, sharing their ideas and solving problems as one team. The morning of the launch was clear and cold. Dr. Kim Ji-ho stood in NASA's mission control room, watching the giant screens. The Artemis rocket stood tall on the launch pad, ready for its journey to the moon. Commander Choi Yun-ho and his crew were already inside the spacecraft. Ji-ho remembered meeting Yun-ho during the final engine tests. The commander had smiled and said, "Your engine will take us there. I trust it completely." Dr. Lee Sun-mei worked at her station nearby, checking the latest moon data. Park Min-seo sat at the life support controls, running final checks on her improved system. T-60 minutes, the launch director announced. Jai-ho watched his engine readings carefully. Everything looked perfect. The months of work, the problems they had solved, the teamwork between Korea and America. It all came down to this moment. T-30 minutes. The room grew quiet. Hundreds of engineers and scientists watched their screens. Each person had a job to do. Each system had to work perfectly. T-10 minutes. Jai-ho thought about his father watching the launch from Korea. The whole world was watching. This wasn't just a return to the moon. This was humanity's next big step into space. T-5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. The rocket's engines fired. Flames and smoke filled the launch pad. Slowly, then faster and faster, the rocket rose into the sky. Engine performance normal, Jai-ho reported. His plasma engine would start working once they were in space. 2 minutes passed. The rocket climbed higher. Then the first warning light flashed. Communications dropping. Someone called out. The signal from the spacecraft was getting weaker. Sun Li looked worried. The radiation levels are higher than expected. It's affecting our radio signals. Jai-ho checked his engine data. The plasma engine was creating a shield against radiation, just as designed. But it wasn't enough. Min Seo moved to Jai-ho's station. What if we increase the plasma field? She suggested. It could protect the communication systems too. Jai-ho did some quick calculations. If we do that, we'll use more fuel. Better than losing contact, Sun-mei said. Jai-ho made the changes. The plasma field around the spacecraft grew stronger. Slowly, the communication signals improved. Contact restored, the flight director announced. Everyone in the room breathed easier. But they weren't safe yet. As the spacecraft flew higher, it encountered more radiation than anyone expected. The sun was more active than usual, sending out powerful solar flares. Jai-ho, Sun-mei, and Min Seo worked together, adjusting the plasma field to protect both the crew and the communication systems. Every change meant recalculating fuel use and flight paths. After 6 hours, the spacecraft passed through the worst of the radiation. Commander Yun-ho's voice came through clearly. Plasma shield performed perfectly. We're on course for lunar orbit. The mission control room erupted in cheers. Jai-ho's engine had done more than just power the spacecraft. It had protected the crew when they needed it most. That evening, as the spacecraft continued its journey to the moon, Jae-ho received a message from his father. You didn't just send Korea to the moon today. You helped make space safer for everyone. Jae-ho looked at the main screen showing the spacecraft's position. They were already a quarter of the way to the moon. His engine was working exactly as planned, pushing humanity closer to its goal. But more challenges lay ahead. The hardest part of the mission was still to come. 3 days into the mission, the spacecraft approached the moon. Dr. Lee Sun-mi studied the latest data from her lunar sensors with growing concern. Something was different from their plans. The moon's magnetic field has changed, she announced to the mission control room. Recent solar activity has made it much stronger than our models predicted. Dr. Kim Ji-ho immediately checked his engine readings. The stronger magnetic fields could affect the plasma engine's performance during the landing sequence. Commander Choi Yun-ho and his crew were counting on that engine to land them safely. How bad is it? Mission Director Thompson asked. Sun-mi displayed a new map of the moon's surface. Red areas showed where the magnetic fields were strongest. The planned landing site was now covered in red. We need to find a new landing site, she said. The current one is too dangerous. The room grew quiet. Changing the landing site now would go against months of planning and practice. The crew had trained for specific terrain and conditions. Park Min-seo spoke up from her station. What about the backup site? The one near the old Apollo 17 landing area. Sun-mi checked the magnetic field readings for that location. The fields are weaker there, but it's a rougher landing area. More rocks and craters. Commander Yun-ho's voice came through the speakers. Mission Control, we need a decision soon. We're approaching lunar orbit insertion. Jae-ho studied both landing sites on his screen. The original site was smoother, but had dangerous magnetic fields. The backup site was rockier, but had safer magnetic conditions. He thought about his engine tests back on Earth. We can do it, he said firmly. The plasma engine can handle the rough terrain at the backup site. It's better than fighting those magnetic fields. Sun-mi had already prepared a detailed analysis. She sent it to Commander Yun-ho's screen. The backup site also has higher concentrations of helium-3. It's actually a better location for our long-term goals. Mission Director Thompson looked at each team leader. One by one, they nodded their agreement. Commander Yun-ho, we're switching to the backup landing site. Sending new coordinates now. The next hour was intense. The spacecraft fired its engines to enter lunar orbit. Jae-ho watched every reading from his plasma engine. Min-seo monitored the life support systems as they adjusted to lunar gravity. As they orbited the moon, Sun-mi's predictions proved correct. The magnetic fields near their original landing site were dangerously strong, but the backup site looked safe despite its rough terrain. Commander Yun-ho practiced the new landing approach in the spacecraft's simulator while the rest of his crew prepared for descent. Their training had included the backup site, but not as thoroughly as the primary location. Descent orbit burn in 30 minutes, the flight director announced. Jae-ho sent a final update to his engine's control system. The plasma field would now focus on providing extra stability for the rocky landing. He had tested this configuration in Korea, but never with a real spacecraft. The engine is ready, he reported. It will give us the control we need. Sun-mi added, magnetic field levels are stable at the new site. We have good conditions for landing. In the spacecraft, Commander Yun-ho began the landing checklist. Years of training, months of preparation, and now they had to trust a backup plan. But that was what space exploration was about, being ready to adapt when conditions changed. The moon grew larger in the spacecraft's windows. Soon, humans would walk on its surface again, not where they had originally planned, but perhaps somewhere even better. The spacecraft descended slowly toward the moon's surface. Inside mission control, everyone held their breath. Dr. Kim Ji-ho watched his engine readings carefully. The plasma system was working perfectly, helping Commander Choi Yun-ho guide the ship between large rocks. Altitude 1,000 meters, the flight controller announced. Dr. Lee Sun-mi monitored the surface conditions. Her screen showed detailed maps of the landing area. Ground looking good. No unusual magnetic activity. 500 meters, came the next call. Park Min-seo checked the life support readings. The systems she had fixed were handling the descent exactly as planned. All crew systems normal. 200 meters. Commander Yunho's voice was calm over the radio. Surface clear. Beginning final approach. 100 meters. Jaiho's plasma engine created a soft blue glow around the spacecraft. It pushed away the moon dust that might block their view of the landing site. 50 meters, 20, 10. A small cloud of dust rose around the spacecraft. Then everything went quiet. Contact light, Commander Yunho said. Then, after a pause, Houston, Serenity Base here. The Eagle has returned. The room erupted in cheers. Humans were back on the moon. Jiho hugged Sunmai and Min-seo. Their months of hard work had paid off. But the mission was just beginning. As the dust settled, the crew began their safety checks. They had to make sure everything was working before they could step outside. First surface walk in 2 hours, the flight director announced. During the wait, Sunmai's instruments picked up something strange. The ground under the landing site was giving off unusual energy readings. They were different from anything seen during the Apollo missions. Commander, Sunmai radioed to Yunho. When you step outside, we need special readings from the ground near the ship. Something's different up there. 2 hours later, Commander Yunho stood at the spacecraft's door. Millions watched on screens around the world as it opened. He stepped carefully onto the ladder. I step upon the moon today, he said, not just for one nation, but as part of humanity's return to stay. His boot touched the lunar surface. He took a few steps, then stopped to collect the samples Sunmai had requested. The special sensor in his suit sent data back to Earth immediately. Sunmai's eyes widened as she saw the readings. This is amazing, she said. The moon's structure here is completely different from what we expected. The helium-3 deposits are part of a larger energy system. Over the next few hours, the crew set up the first pieces of what would become Serenity Base. They installed special equipment designed by Min-seo to protect against the harsh lunar environment. Jiho's plasma technology helped power everything. As night fell on Earth, the lunar day was just beginning. The crew prepared for 2 weeks of sunlight and work. They would study Sunmai's discovery, test Min-seo's systems, and use Jiho's plasma technology to begin collecting helium-3. In mission control, the 3 engineers watched the crew work. Their different ideas and skills had helped humans not just return to the moon, but find something new and important. And this was only the first day. What else do you think we'll find up there? Min-seo asked. Sunmai smiled. The moon has been waiting 50 years to share its secrets with us. Now that we're back, I think it has many surprises left to show us. 6 months had passed since the first landing. Serenity Base now stood proudly on the lunar surface, its solar panels gleaming in the sunlight. Dr. Kim Jiho looked at the latest images from the moon on the main screen in mission control. 3 more crews had joined Commander Choi Yunho's team, making the base humanity's first permanent home beyond Earth. Dr. Lee Sunmai walked into the room carrying new data printouts. Her discovery of the moon's energy systems had changed their understanding of lunar geology. Scientists from 20 countries now work together to study her findings. The first helium-3 shipment arrives next week, she told Jiho. The processing plant is running perfectly. The plant used Jiho's plasma technology to extract helium-3 from lunar soil. Soon, this clean energy source would power cities on Earth. It was more than they had dreamed possible when the mission began. Park Min-seo joined them, returning from a meeting about the next base expansion. Her life support systems had worked so well that other space agencies were using her designs for their own missions. Germany and Japan want to build the next section of the base, she said. Their teams arrive in 3 months. Jiho remembered how different things had been a year ago, when he first arrived at NASA. Back then, He had worried about leaving Korea's space program. Now, Korea was a leader in lunar operations, sharing technology with the world. Commander Yunho's voice came through the speakers. "Mission Control, we're ready to test the new plasma shield." Jaiho turned to his console. The shield was his latest invention, designed to protect the entire base from radiation. It combined his engine technology with Min Seo's environmental systems and Sun Mi's understanding of lunar conditions. Shield activation in 3, 2, 1. A soft blue glow appeared around Serenity Base on their screens. The shield worked perfectly, just as their combined research had predicted. Later that day, the three engineers sat in the NASA cafeteria, looking at old photos from the start of the mission. There they were, solving the engine problems, fixing the life support systems, choosing the new landing site. Each challenge had made their team stronger. "Did you see today's news?" Min Seo asked, showing them her tablet. A new fusion power plant in Seoul was preparing to use lunar helium-3. Similar plants were being built in 12 other countries. "From the moon to Earth," Sun Mi said quietly. "Just like we hoped." Jaiho thought about his father's words about space belonging to everyone. The Artemis program had proved this true. Countries that once competed now worked together at Serenity Base. Their shared mission had created new friendships, new discoveries, and new hope for Earth's future. The next morning, they watched another crew launch to the moon. The rocket rose into the sky, carrying scientists from 5 different countries. As it disappeared into the blue, Jaiho realized something important. Going to the moon had taught humanity more than just space travel. It had taught them how to work together. 6 months ago, they had helped humans return to the moon. Now they were helping humans stay there, working together to build a better future for everyone on Earth. And this was still just the beginning. Commander Yunho's words from the first landing echoed in Jaiho's mind. Not just for one nation, but as part of humanity's return to stay. They had done more than just return. They had shown what people could achieve when they shared their dreams, their knowledge, and their hope for the future. The moon was no longer just a distant light in the sky. It was humanity's next home, a place where countries worked together and new discoveries waited around every crater.